Hello?
Hi, Terrence. This is Dean from Santa Fe.
Hi, Dean. How are you?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Pretty good.
Good. Well, I'm looking forward to this. Just as, I guess, a little background, I'm very familiar with a lot of your published interviews, and I've read The Archaic Revival and parts of the other books, and a great admirer, actually. And I also work part-time for a magazine distribution company that distributes magazines like Psychedelic Illuminations and so forth, and UFO, so I've caught a lot of more, I don't want to say exactly obscure, but some of the maybe interviews that other people haven't, so I think I have a good basis to come, to ask you some questions, and I did, a fair share of psychedelics. I haven't done any TMT yet, but I'm wanting to do that, so anyway, I think if you're ready, I am too.
Now, before we get into this, describe where
This will appear in the Santa Fe Sun, which is a monthly alternative / like metaphysical paper that's been going here about 6 years. And the issue, this is for the April issue, which will coincide with your visit here at the end of the month in April. And
so how long do you envision going?
maybe about a half hour.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right, let her rip.
Okay. I'm thinking there was an interview you gave in UFO magazine in '93, and you say that something has taken hold of our species and is sculpting us to its specifications and leading us out of the animal body and the animal mind into its domain, whatever that is. Do we, or are we in fact going to lose our bodies, or is it more like adding perceptual states that we can go into different dimensions with? How do you see that?
Well, I think about it different ways, and I'm interested in what other people think about it. People like Hans Moravec and Frank Kipler and these sorts of people. I think that probably it will be an augmentation, that what's happening is we're discovering ourselves to be embedded subsets of larger organisms in nature, basically. So I think that the worldwide knitting together through electronic technology is probably more of what's to come.
Then does this have something to do with the oversoul? And which I know you've talked about the oversoul being basically a projection of collective human consciousness. Is that anywhere near correct?
Well, that's sort of it. I mean, the way I think of it is I think of it as a kind of an attractor in the mathematical sense of a point in a vector space toward which everything is moving. And, clearly biology and cultural history and so forth and so on represents some kind of process which is conserving novelty and accelerating into novelty. I mean, that's the root of this faster change that seems to permeate everything. And when you propagate that process into the future, you reach the conclusion that we're approaching some kind of a singularity or a cusp point where the entire system flips over and becomes unrecognizable to the previous point.
And does that flipping over and reaching that singularity mean at that point just a kind of wide open paradigm where it's just total diversity without that kind of point, or does another attractor, do you see another attractor taking place to bring us along another, whatever, how many hundreds of thousands of years, or will that not mean anything more like time?
Well, I don't know exactly. I mean, one way to think of this process and the processes that have led to it is as a slow conquest of dimensionality, from fixed life forms with very limited sensory apparatus up through advanced animals, and then language using mathematics using human beings. So maybe what is about to happen is a kind of new dimension is to be added to reality that is orthogonal, meaning perpendicular to all the other familiar dimensions of reality. And, I have thought things like this for, 25 years, but recently it's become possible to see what this might mean in practical terms as we see something like the internet emerge, or its anticipation through psychoactive plants. These are orthogonal dimensions to ordinary reality that more and more people are accessing and integrating.
Well, do you think there's a connection then between the amount and intensity of, say, psychedelic experiences, especially over the last 30 years, that people are experiencing, and the across the board's acceptance of, say, UFOs by everybody else, that even many of those that aren't doing that or have never done any such thing? Does it have anything to do with like a morphogenic field resonance, or how?
Well, I think that part of what the psychedelic thing demonstrated was that reality is more complicated and more labyrinthine than the rationalists supposed, and that the spirited world of rational science was going to have to move over for the inspired world of the shaman, which was being reported by modern anthropology. The effect of all this, and quantum physics is in there too, is to generally blur people's notion of what reality is and what is possible. And that certainly then permits us to notice things that may have been in the background and suppressed by the previous more monolithic, print-created, linear ideology. So in a sense, breakdown is opportunity. In this moment of epistemological confusion that is affecting the culture, there's an opportunity to see new realities, new perspectives on old reality.
Well, then do you feel that the UFO, and that's just the general phrase for the whole phenomena, is that coming from a new or an old place? I mean, is it coming from Paleolithic times or a dimension, or what would you?
Well, I think it's a complicated situation. I think part of the problem is that as human beings, we're naive about language, and we're even more naive about the effects of media on mass culture, and the individual mind. So you take somebody who is a rainforest hunter-gatherer and compare the contents of their mind to somebody who grew up, let's say, in West LA and has watched thousands of hours of TV and hundreds of movies and millions of commercials and so forth and so on. The contents of the unconscious of this latter person is extremely complicated and not the sort of data flow that the primate mind was organized to deal with. And I think part of what is happening is the distinction, the ordinary distinction between dream and memory is somehow compromised by exposure to mass media. If you've never seen a movie, never read a book, never heard a radio program, then you really only know one story, your story, and then the stories of your group that plug into your story. If you have a media-drenched mind, you have a completely different epistemological foundation from which you're building up the world. And I think this has unleashed great potential for projection and uncertainty in this area called, the shifting boundaries between what is possible and what is supposed to be possible. And the UFO rides that edge very nicely.
Does having a media drenched background or so on, do you think prepare us well to meet the future that's developing, or is it just depends?
Well, that's a complicated question. I guess we'd have to be perform a McLuhan-esque autopsy on culture to figure that out. But for example, the abduction phenomenon I find a disturbing phenomenon, which I don't take seriously as data about extraterrestrial visitors. I think it's more data about how, for some reason, possibly the one I mentioned, saturation by media, possibly some other factor, could be food additives, could be anything. People in large numbers at the end of the century are losing this ability to distinguish memory and dream. And so their past is a bizarre amalgamation of memory, dream, and I suppose we should add in their drug experience. And this creates for a different relationship to one's past. I mean, imagine the state you could be in if you could not tell your past from your past dream. So that to me is a symptom of the plasticity of the psyche and how naive we are about what media and mass communication and so forth have done to us and about us. I'm very big on the internet because I think it's an antidote to this, because it's a way where people can, for the first time, produce rather than consume. And of course, psychedelics are set you up for all of this. They show you that you have an imagination and that it is rich and interesting, and then, basically they turn you back towards the worth of your uniqueness. And then
Well, I was curious. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your thought. I was just thinking of this in chapter 20 from True Hallucinations. You say here, well, first of all, you call yourself a contactee, but then, and then later on you say, yet from it all I have learned that there is no religious revelation more satisfying than the hard-won fruits of simple understanding, and there is no liberation to compare with freeing oneself from the illusions and delusions of the age in which one lives. If you were to make a little short list, what would be some of the illusions and delusions of the age you're trying to free yourself from, or are freeing yourself from? Is it?
Well, the first one is consumerism, that worth somehow attends the acquisition of objects. This is a very dangerous addiction, a very dangerous scheme that serves no human being. It serves certain kinds of institutions, but it's killing the earth. We cannot dig the mines deep enough, cut the forest fast enough to fulfill the middle-class expectations that capitalism is raising in the hearts of hundreds of millions of people. So that's one. Consumerism is one of the great illusions of the age. I suppose the other is the morbidity of introspection. They're all for introspection. They're a tiny minority, and Freud on introspection in the West has been associated with morbid narcissism. And this is part of what the psychedelic repression is. Part of the game of capitalism is to keep you from discovering their inner richness and focus on the exterior. So that's another. The undemonizing imagination. And that has a sexual component, it has a pharmacological component. We don't have to be afraid of nature. And this is the message that Western
psychedelic explorations being part of the suppression of pagan impulses? Would you include the UFO phenomena area, its ridicule, and so on?
Well, I'm not sure it's UFO phenomenon, since we don't know what it is. We don't know quite where to put it. I assume that it's sort of that, every